So now let's go back and ask that question, answer that question of how do I enter those particular markets once I've made these decisions. You can see from a standpoint of commitment, the lowest commitment in terms of cost and ownership is exporting. This is simply where you make the product and you try to put it in the hands of a distributor in a home country. An example of a company here close to home that does that is Air Tractor, located down in Olney, Texas, about 45 miles away. They build basically crop dusters, and about a quarter to a third of those things are sold around the world. All made in Olney, all marketed out of Olney. Just when it comes time to deliver, they fly the airplane across the seas or down to South America, and they deliver the airplane. Licensing, this is where you take something in your secret sauce or your product and you give it to a competitor or a partner, I should say, in another country, and they build it under license. Franchising is a similar form of that licensing, and then the idea that you do it through a strategic alliance. Now we ally with one another to do our marketing, and we saw that was a lot of the strategic alliances. It's this co-marketing sort of thing where I partner with a foreign company that's going to help me get my product into that country. The idea of acquisition, I buy a firm in that country and I enter that market by doing an acquisition, or a greenfield venture or totally owned subsidiary where I go in and buy a plant. So now in BSG, which do you do? Think about it. Yeah, you're really an exporter in BSG. You simply put your product out there to the various wholesalers. Some examples of acquisition: when Walmart entered several markets, they actually bought local companies. Home Depot, a lot of the retailers did things like that to try to give them a leg up on being able to be seen as not quite so foreign. Greenfield Ventures, when you go in and you just build it all on your own. The Toyota trunk plant down in San Antonio, great example of a greenfield venture. Intel, the chip manufacturer, builds factories all around the world, but they're all Intel owned and all Intel run. So the textbook does a great job of describing these, so I'm not going to go into them any further. And so the last question is, what risks are there involved with going global? And there's quite a few. Obviously, the whole liability of foreignness, and this is why sometimes companies prefer regional as opposed to global. They want to minimize that liability of foreignness simply because they're more comfortable with the culture. We could all tell lots of stories about how the culture is different. I served in Japan in the Far East on many different occasions, and that's a very different culture. You know, things like you don't put their business card in your back pocket after you've changed business cards, because if you sit down, they think you're sitting on their face. That whole concept of face and how they negotiate, very different than we do in the Western world. So just this idea of I don't know the rules, I'm not comfortable there, is a real limitation and can expose companies to make some big mistakes. Then you have the political risk, the rule of law. Do they obey the laws and do they apply the laws equally? Several oil companies had to walk away with major, and I mean multi-billion dollar development deals in Russia because they just decided that they couldn't trust the Russian government and that it wasn't going to work out long term. So imagine being the CEO explaining that to the board. Then you get the idea of corruption. Not everybody has the Western view of morals, and that can be difficult. And it's easy to go, well, I would never be corrupt. Think about this. Imagine that you were launching a factory in Mexico that was building a part that was essential to your other factory in the United States where the good stuff, so to speak, was being manufactured. And everybody's ready to go. People are hired, we're ready to begin production, and you get down into Mexico, and what it boils down to is if you don't pay $15,000 in bribes, the inspectors aren't going to come out and sign off on things so you can begin production. And you have your entire company, hundreds of jobs in your local hometown that are relying on this small factory in Mexico beginning to do its thing. How tempting do you think it is to pay that $15,000 and be done with it? But yet you violated U.S. law, and obviously the idea of instability. Economics, there's also some risks, and some of this thing of intellectual property protection bleeds back into the rule of law issue. A lot of concerns that China does a poor job of protecting intellectual property, and it makes people very careful about doing anything in China that has intellectual property. Also, that one thing I should go back to this, that we're seeing in China is this idea the rule of law is not applied equally. And so foreigners are treated by one set of rules versus home companies. And this is making China a very difficult market for foreign companies to operate in. Back to economic risk, global disruption. If you have a truly global supply chain, problems all over the world can disrupt your supply chain. And then currency fluctuations. And you're living the dream on that in BSG, so you're becoming well familiar with the challenges of that. When you have a strong dollar, if you're a U.S. manufacturer, is that good for you or bad for you? U.S. manufacturer that does a lot of export business. The answer is it's bad for you. A strong dollar drives up your cost vis-a-vis the rest of the world, and it's very problematic. So let's sum up with this interesting slide, with this interesting picture. If business is already a game of chess, when you take your firm overseas, you're playing chess on many levels. And so the benefits are clear: more product, lower cost, but yet the challenges are very real. And so these are the central issues that you're going to have to go through when you make a decision to go global.